Hello there and welcome back to another technique video with me, Robin Williams. This time I'm going to start looking at what goes on in the recovery of the rowing stroke, and I say start looking at it because there's actually a fair bit to look at together, and this is going to get split over 2 videos or possibly even 3. We're going to look at the back end, how we set up the recovery, what goes on in the recovery, but it's important because compared to the ergo that I'm using for these demonstrations, the boat is obviously much more lively, it's got balance issues, it's travelling through water and so on. So on the ergometer, mostly what I do in the drive phase, the work I do, is what gives me the score on the machine. In the boat, the speed that I'm going at is the combination of the drive phase and the recovery phase. So there's a big opportunity for people who are skillful and who move well on the water in a rowing boat to make a good contribution to their overall speed there. As people say, ergos don't float. So the ergo is a great machine for just basic delivery of power and training in something that's fairly close to the rowing movement. But in terms of feel and subtlety and the particularly this recovery phase, obviously there are big differences. Anyway, let's see how we get on. I hope you enjoy this. When it comes to the recovery, I have to admit that when I was a youngster I hadn't really got a clue, and our criteria was to pack as many strokes in as possible and get up the slide as quickly as possible. And that's exactly what we did, and we didn't win too many races, I can tell you. So I think nowadays everyone would know and recognise the recovery is important because our total boat speed is the product of our drive phase and the recovery phase. But to me the recovery is quite fascinating because compared to the drive phase, in the drive phase the distance that the handle moves from catch to finish is effectively a fixed distance. I mean, I can row a bit longer or a bit shorter, but that's how far the lever will move, so that's how much boat will pass the spoon. If I've done a good job with the power phase here and I've imparted good energy, it'll run a long way between strokes, and the recovery therefore is very variable. We can influence how far the boat travels in the recovery based on the energy that we've created here, but how we reciprocate, how we move off that finish point, recover our mass, and if we don't put the brakes on at all, then we can coax the best possible distance out of the boat before we have to take another stroke. So again, just looking at the finish as our start point. We talked in previous videos about what we're trying to do here, accelerating our mass, hopefully trying to sit well and so on. Now, one of the important things at the finish is timing. I'm going to talk about the pause versus don't pause thing another time. It comes up in coaches, conferences, and I run workshops for coaches around the UK. Every time we give this some discussion. But that's for another video. Okay. The point I want to make is that when we're rowing the boat, as we getting near the end part of the stroke here, and finally the handle's just brushing our body, the oar itself hasn't quite finished its work. Even though I've got my legs out straight, my body is as far back as I want it to go, and I've drawn my arms through. So even when the handle reaches me here, the oar hasn't quite finished because it's got stored up energy. So the handle touching my body is one end of the lever, the other end is still in the water, attached with some force, some flex in the oar. So it's important at the finish that I allow the oar here to finish its work. So this leads to one of the first common faults, if you like, with the recovery, is that people rush it. They get somewhere near the finish and they drive the handle round and chase it with the shoulders, and don't organise well, don't sit so well, don't transfer their mass well. We need to let the oar finish its work so that the oar leaves the water easily. If it's leaving the water with a kick or with throwing up water, it'll unsettle the boat, and it won't come out very easily. And if we try and feather when there's work on the oar, then people often get sore forearms or even tenosynovitis or a repetitive strain injury. It's very common in sculling that people feather the water out at the finish rather than pushing it, leaving it, and then feathering it. So it's a detail, but it's a pedantic and important detail to just have a tiny bit of sit time and let the oar give up its energy, then it'll leave the water, and then we can think about how we're going to move through the recovery. Now, in the recovery itself, having gone through a legs, body, arms, drive sequence, we're obviously going to go back through arms, body and legs recovery, and that's common knowledge. I'm not going to dwell on that point. The challenge in rowing, and the mistakes people make, is moving too quickly, too slowly, or moving out of sequence. So with the arms they don't weigh a great deal. They've got a distance to come in and a distance to go out. So we need to think about fluid elbows, because that helps there. The mass is not great. The mass of my body, my trunk movement is very important, and it's important for balance as well. People who throw their weight around, or there's a lot of body weight which can upset the boat here. But assuming that we're okay with balance, we're just talking about recovery of mass. The movement back through the hips here needs to be appropriate for the speed of the boat. So I get to the finish here, my hands move away. As my hands move out past my knees and extend here, they naturally draw my shoulder forward again, pull the lats through, draw me through my hips and unlock the knees. So quarter slide is another one of those really important reference points. I've already said the finish is a very important reference point. Getting off the finish back to quarter slide, or maybe 1/3 slide, is also very important. And it's important because if I can get myself properly organized by this early part of the recovery, in terms of my arms and my body position, I'm ready for the next stroke, and all that needs to happen is my legs rise as the boat comes to me, and I've got plenty of quiet thinking time to just feel the boat and make sure that I'm ready for the next stroke. When I think you'd probably know again from boat speed, what happens is we get to the finish, and as we recover here, this point is roughly where the hull reaches its maximum speed. But when we're up at racing speed, that peak moves further forwards and it's in much less time. So it's critical we get these things right at the lower rates, because they stand much more chance of going wrong at higher rates. And I'm going to look at that in part 2 of this video, because there's too much content actually to put into just a few minutes in one episode. So this will be broken down into part 1 and part 2. Quite a useful little tip here, which I've borrowed from another coach having a conversation about this a while ago. In terms of working out how you move off the back end, what is too quick, too slow. Imagine at the end of the stroke, if I use the handle again, imagine I get to the end of my rowing stroke, and when I get to here and I've just let the oar release, I'm just beginning to see the puddle leave the spoon. Imagine if I drop an orange or a tennis ball or a floating object in the water, it would of course float off down past the boat, because the boat's moving through the water. So that would tell me, it's like a speedometer, that would tell me how fast I'm going. And from my release position here, what I would do is I would try and follow that orange with my hands. So I need to recover it now, get my orange back. So let's say I've dropped the orange and the orange has floated away somewhere near my knees. My hands would keep pace with the orange, keeping pace with the boat. My legs are still lying still because there's no reason to move. My body isn't yet moving, but as the orange moves a little bit further past my shins towards my ankle, of course my arms aren't long enough, so I have to lengthen my body, and my body rock over would be keeping pace with the orange, which is effectively what the hull speed is. And then as the orange or the float carries on, floating off down past the boat, my legs would be with it. So at each point through the recovery, I'm opposite the orange. That means that I'm moving in an equal and opposite way to the hull. If I'm too slow, then I simply may not even get to front stops. And of course we all know that actually rushing is a very common problem, and then you get there ahead of the orange, you're heavy and you're off balance, and it's difficult to coordinate the front end. So that highlights a little bit of why I think the recovery is important, and also some of the things that goes wrong. What about some solutions? Well, a couple of solutions would be, of course, rowing along. If I just get the machine moving, and perhaps doing a pause here, and then row along, and do a pause here. Pauses can be anywhere from arms away, bodies away, quarter slide, or even all the way at the front. If you pause here when the oar is still out of the water, the boat still runs quite well actually. It doesn't actually slow down that much. Pauses are very good because in a way, you know, the footboard wants to be light under the feet. If we slide a bit too quickly here, the only way we can get ourselves back into control to take another stroke is to use the footboard like a brake, like a handbrake or a foot brake, to control our mass to be able to change direction. And we don't want to do that, because if we come onto the footboard with some heaviness there, it pushes the boat the wrong way. So being with the boat in the recovery is the theme. That's what we want to be thinking. We've got to have a way of knowing what our hull speed is so that we can move appropriately, and then we can keep a good cycle going. Pauses. Another exercise would be the cutting the cake exercise, where you do this kind of thing. And you can do those cutting the cake exercises at any point, again in the recovery, half slide or whatever you want. It's just a way of checking whether you've got control of the movements, whether you're moving with the boat. And there's plenty of other exercises in the recovery. I mean, eyes shut is a good one as well, because you have to really feel the boat. You obviously can't see things. And on the ergo, doing it with a damper here, right down, is quite good, because you have to move a bit more fluidly. There are lots of different exercises you can do, and we're going to look at this and some more aspects of the recovery in the next video. See you next time.